I used to think life couldn't take more from a person once it had already stripped away the basics, a home, family, and anything that felt like safety. But Manchester taught me that life always had another test ready. By the time I turned 20, I had become a boy who carried everything he owned in a torn rucksack and tried to smile through days that never really got easier. Most mornings began with the same routine. I'd splash cold water on my face in the public toilet near the northern quarter, run my fingers through my messy hair, and pretend the steam from passing buses counted as warmth. Then I'd make my way to the small hot dog stall where I'd somehow found work. It wasn't glamorous. Half the time the grill hissed louder than the customer spoke, but it was honest work, something I could hold on. People only ever saw a simple lad behind that counter, someone who handed out hot dogs with mustard and a quiet smile. What they didn't see was how those long shifts kept my mind from wandering to the things I'd lost. They didn't see how badly I wanted to belong somewhere, anywhere. The owner of the stall, though he saw more than most, was in his late 20s, sharp features softened by warm brown eyes. He had this odd mix of confidence and gentleness about him, the sort you don't expect from people who run small food stalls in the middle of the city. From the first day, he'd spoken to me like I mattered, not just as an employee doing a job, but as a person worth noticing. I remember my second day working there was raining harder than usual, the kind that soaks through your clothes no matter how fast you run. I was shaking from the cold when he handed me a steaming cup of drink. Lad, you'll freeze out here, he said with a half smile. No one had said something like that to me in a long time. As the weeks passed, small acts of kindness kept appearing, as if he couldn't help himself. A spare jacket left accidentally by the till. Breakfast sandwich on mornings I looked unusually tired. A few extra pounds slipped into my pay packet with a quiet, "Don't make a fuss." I tried to tell myself it was just his nature, that he was kind to everyone, but deep down I knew he wasn't like this with the other staff. He checked on me more. He stood closer. He listened longer. Wasn't uncomfortable. Not then. If anything, it felt nice to have someone see me when the rest of the world barely looked my way. I'd gone so long without affection that even the smallest warmth felt like a gift. But the truth was simple. Still had nowhere to live. Nights were the worst. I hated sleeping in the cold. Hated pretending I wasn't terrified when footsteps echoed near the alley behind the closed shops. I hated waking up stiff and damp, knowing I'd have to pretend everything was normal a few hours later. But I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. One evening, after we closed the stall, he locked up the till and glanced at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Something softer, deeper. "Can I ask you something?" he said, leaning his elbows on the counter. "Yeah," I whispered, already sensing it wasn't about work. "You're not sleeping somewhere safe, are you?" The words hit me like a punch. Thought I'd hidden it well, but he'd noticed the dark circles, the way my clothes sometimes smelled faintly of damp, the exhaustion I couldn't mask. Froze, unsure how much truth to give. It didn't push. Instead, he walked around the counter, stood in front of me, and spoke quietly, almost carefully. "Don't have to explain anything, but listen, if you ever need somewhere warm, somewhere proper, my flat's got a spare room." My chest tightened. Offers like that don't come without expectations. Had learned that the hard way from people before, but there was nothing predatory in his eyes, just concern. Still, I didn't answer. I took the offer, tucked it away in my mind like a secret escape hatch, and went back to pretending everything was fine. But life doesn't let you pretend forever. A week later, the temperature dropped suddenly. The wind whipped through the streets like a blade. That night, when I tried to sleep behind the shop, I couldn't stop shivering. My teeth hurt from how hard they were knocking together. Curled up tighter, pulled my jacket around myself, and prayed for morning. It didn't come the way I expected. Woke to him, shaking my shoulder gently, his face pale. "Mate, what are you doing out here?" His voice wasn't angry. Was scared. I tried to sit up, but dizziness washed over me. My fingers were numb. It didn't wait another second. Without asking he help me stand, wrapped his arms around me to stop my trembling, and guided me into his car. "You're staying with me tonight," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. His flat wasn't huge, but to me it felt like walking into another world. Warm lights, soft sofa cushions, the faint smell of laundry detergent. It felt like home, the kind I hadn't known for years. It made me sit by the heater, gave me clean clothes, and forced a warm bowl of soup into my hands. "Eat," he insisted. And for once, I did as someone told me when I finally crawled into the spare room. Bed, an actual bed, not concrete, not cardboard. I almost cried. I stared at the ceiling, feeling heat seep into my bones, and whispered a thank you he didn't hear. The next morning he acted like nothing unusual had happened. He made breakfast, joked lightly, and dropped the subject of where I'd been sleeping. There was no pressure, no questions, no conditions. He let me breathe. By the third night, when he asked again if I wanted to stay until I got back on my feet, I agreed. Maybe too quickly. Maybe because I was tired of running. Maybe because I wanted to believe that someone genuinely cared. For a while, everything felt stable. We worked days together, shared dinners, sometimes laughed about customers who asked for impossible orders. And at night, I went to my small room wrapped in blankets that smelled clean, safe, warm. But somewhere beneath all that kindness, something else was growing. Something I couldn't see clearly yet. Something he felt but hadn't said out loud. And I wasn't ready for how quickly everything would change. His breath slowed. He seemed to be watching me, not in a protective way, but in a way that carried questions he hadn't voiced. Brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking. After all he'd done, nothing but help me. But the night, everything changed. The air in the flat felt different. It was late past midnight. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from a long shift and the constant noise of customers. My room was dim except for the warm glow of the lamp. I kept on out of habit. I had just begun drifting into sleep when I heard the soft creak of the floorboards outside. At first, I assumed he was getting a glass of water, but then the footsteps paused right outside my door. I sat up, slowly, heart beating harder than it should have. Before I could say anything, the door eased open a few inches, enough for him to step inside without switching on the light. "Hey," he whispered. His voice was gentle, almost too gentle. I cleared my throat quietly. "Everything all right?" he nodded, taking a few slow steps toward the bed. In the warm glow of the lamp, I could see something in his expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of longing, vulnerability, and something darker beneath. "I couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Just wanted to check on you." My breath caught. That sentence wasn't wrong, but the way he said it made it feel like it carried more weight than it should. He sat on the edge of my bed, without asking, close enough that the mattress dipped and my body shifted slightly towards him, my pulse hammered in my throat. "You've been doing well?" he said softly, eyes tracing my face. "You're settling into the flat, into the job, into everything." I nodded slowly, trying my best. He smiled faintly, then reached out, his fingers brushing my arm. A simple touch, but it felt too intentional, too searching. My skin burned under it, not with desire, but with confusion and something like panic. "You're a good lad," he whispered. "Really good lad." I swallowed hard. The room felt too small, too warm, too quiet. "Thanks," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. His hand lingered. Didn't know how to pull away without hurting him, without seeming ungrateful. I didn't want to hurt him. He'd saved me from cold, hunger, fear. He'd given me a bed, warmth, safety. But the closeness, the way he was looking at me now, wasn't about safety anymore. His gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then lifted again. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question twisted something in my chest. "Sometimes," I said cautiously. "But I'm all right. Don't lie," he whispered. "I see it in your eyes." His voice trembled with something raw, almost desperate. He moved his hand from my arm to my shoulder, fingers sliding. Slowly, too slowly, my breath hitched, panic rising. "I just want you to know," he murmured, leaning closer. "I'd take care of you if you let me." The words were tender, but the intention behind Them felt heavy like a weight being pressed onto my chest. I shifted, slightly trying to create space, but he misread it as uncertainty rather than discomfort. His fingers brushed the side of my neck. That was when my heart lurched. I think I should sleep, I said softly, forcing calm into my voice. He froze just for a second, then nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine, not even for a heartbeat. Oh, right, he whispered. Good night, lad. He stood slowly, almost reluctantly, his hand dragging off my shoulder with a faint tremble. He walked to the door, paused, looked back as if wanting to say something more, something he shouldn't, then quietly stepped out. I exhaled shakily the moment the door closed, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The flat felt different now, unsteady, like a place where the ground had shifted under my feet. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning I knew what I had to do. He was already in the kitchen when I walked in, making tea, like nothing had happened. He greeted me with the same gentle smile as always, but now I could see the undercurrent. Beneath it, the expectation, the hope, the unspoken feelings he was trying not to reveal too clearly. Morning, I said, quietly. You all right? He asked, tilting his head. I hesitated, then lied. Yeah. His smile softened again. Good. But inside my mind was racing. He had been kind. He had saved me. But last night had shown me something I hadn't wanted to see, that his kindness came with a depth of emotion I couldn't give. And if I stayed, things would only get messier, more confusing, more painful. So I made a decision. That afternoon, while he was at the stall and the flat was quiet, I packed my small bag, folded the clothes he'd given me, took only what was mine, not much, wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter. Thank you for everything, but I need space. You've been good to me and I won't forget that. Please don't look for me. My hand shook as I placed the note down. By the time the sun set, I was already walking away from the building, the strap of my bag cutting into my shoulder, my chest heavy with guilt and sadness. He had wanted something more. I wasn't ready to give it, and so once again I became the boy who ran. The night I left his flat, I thought freedom would feel like air rushing into starving lungs. Instead, it felt like stepping out into cold, empty space with nothing to catch me. Manchester at night had a way of swallowing people whole, especially boys like me who carried their whole life in a bag that barely weighed anything at. I walked for hours past the tram stops glowing orange, past shuttered shops, past people laughing outside bars, as if the world had never broken them. Every step away from him felt necessary, yet strangely painful. He hadn't hurt me, not truly. He hadn't forced anything, but the boundary he crossed, or almost crossed, had cracked something inside me. By sunrise I found myself wandering through the industrial outskirts near Trafford, where old warehouses stood like giants half asleep. My legs ached, my head pounded, and I hadn't eaten since the afternoon before. I didn't know where to go, and winter air made every breath sting. That was when I found the second hot dog stall. It wasn't really a stall, more like a converted food van parked near an old garage yard. I stood there staring at it, not because I wanted a job, but because the steam rising from its window reminded me that warmth still existed somewhere. A man stepped out, mid-30s, tall, broad-shouldered, with neat stubble and gray eyes that seemed too calm for a world like this. He looked at me once, then again, as if noticing something most people would ignore. You all right there? He called. Hesitated. I'm fine. You don't look fine. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how tired, cold, and hungry I must have. Just passing through. He nodded slowly, then jerked his head toward the got leftover rolls. Come on. Every instinct told me to walk away. Learn not to trust kindness so easily, but hunger is a bigger force than pride. So I stepped inside. The warmth hit first, then the smell of onions and grilled meat. He handed me a fresh hot dog wrapped in foil. I stared at it, unsure how to react. Go on, he urged. Eat. I did, and it tasted like the first proper thing I'd had in days. He watched me for a moment, arms folded, then said, Name's Thomas. I wiped my mouth. Callum. Well, Callum, he said, voice steady but not unkind. You need work. I blinked. What? My mate quit. Yesterday. None to do basic stuff. In hand for now. I can show you the ropes. The offer came so suddenly it stunned me. Felt like I'd walked into one life and straight into another. Without warning. You don't even know. Me, I said quietly. He shrugged. I don't need to. I can see you're trying. Something about the certainty in his tone made my throat tighten. I nodded. Without thinking too much, and just like that, I stepped into a new routine. Working with Thomas was nothing like working with the first owner. The first man had been warm, emotional, and gentle in ways that sometimes blurred lines. Thomas was structured, disciplined, and reserved. He didn't hover, didn't overstep, didn't ask personal questions. He'd show me how much mustard to put, how to clean the grill, how to greet customers. He'd correct me when I messed up, but never sharply, just with a calm firmness that made me want to do better. Good job, he'd say whenever I improved. Too simple. Words that meant more than he probably realized. Nights were colder now that I was back on the streets, but the work kept me busy and the earned cash kept me fed. I slept in bus shelters, sometimes under bridges, other times hardly ideal, but at least Thomas made the days feel bearable. A week passed, then two. He never cried, but he noticed things. The way my fingers trembled from lack of sleep. The way I flinched when car horns blared. The faint sadness I carried but never voiced. One evening, after we closed the van, he locked the door and turned to me with a strange look. Not emotional, not intrusive, just thoughtful. You've nowhere to stay, do you? He asked. The question hit me like a punch. I sighed, bracing myself for pity or pressure. But Thomas simply slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and said, I've got a spare garage room. Not fancy, but it's warm. You can stay there if you want. Stared at him. What? What do you want in return? He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. Nothing. You work hard. You deserve somewhere safe to sleep. His tone was so ordinary, so matter-of-fact that I almost laughed. After everything I'd been through, the idea of kindness without strings felt impossible, but I accepted. The garage room was attached to the side of his quiet little house. Small, simple, with a bed and a heater that rattled, but to me it felt like a sanctuary. He never entered the room without knocking, never looked at me longer than necessary, never touched me. In the silence of that room, I began to breathe properly for the first time in months. But peace has a way of making you forget that some storms follow you, no matter where you go. It started with a missing 20-pound note, then another, then a few items from the counter. I didn't notice at first, but one afternoon, Thomas stepped out of the van holding a small notebook where he kept the daily sales written down. Callum, he said, slowly, some cash hasn't added up lately. My stomach dropped. You think He held up a hand. I'm not accusing you. I just want to know if something's wrong. I shook my head instantly. Didn't take anything. I swear. He studied me carefully. His eyes weren't cruel, just searching, calculating, as if trying to solve a puzzle. I believe you, he said at last, but I could tell he was uncertain. That uncertainty grew roots. A few days later, the missing items increased. A customer complained about incorrect change. Someone spread a rumor about a young lad stealing near the industrial park. And then it happened. 2 police officers knocked on Thomas's door the next morning. I was in the garage room, half asleep, when I heard their voices. My heart hammered as if it already knew what was coming. Thomas called out my name with a tone I didn't recognize. Shaken, conflicted, almost apologetic. I stepped out slowly. The officers looked at me with that expression I'd seen before. The one that said, "We've already decided who you are. Callum Hensley." Yes. Received a report of theft and unlawful handling of cash from this premises. My chest tightened. I didn't do anything. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. Lad, they found the missing money behind your bed. My breath vanished. What? I whispered, voice cracking. Didn't put anything there. You know I wouldn't. His eyes softened painfully. Want to believe you. God, I do. But what am I supposed to think? I didn't steal. I cried. But my voice came out helpless, small. The officers moved closer. Everything unraveled. Handcuffs cold. Metal. The slow walk to the police car. Thomas standing there with his arms folded, jaw tight, torn between doubt and guilt, but not doing anything to stop them. I felt betrayal like a blade. At the station, no one listened. They processed me fast, too fast. By nightfall, I was in a cell staring at cracked paint and metal bars. I'd lost the first owner because I ran. I lost the second one because someone lied. And once again, I was a boy with nothing. Except fate wasn't quite done with me, because that night the cell door slid opened slightly and a figure stepped inside. An older inmate with rough stubble, deep-set eyes, and a presence that filled the entire space. He climbed onto my bunk without hesitation, and my life shifted again in a direction I never expected. The first night in the cell was the kind of cold that made a man question every decision he'd ever made. The mattress was thin as paper. The blanket smelled of damp concrete, and the silence felt like it had teeth. I lay there staring at the tiny barred window, wondering how quickly a life could crash, burn, and still keep falling. I'd always heard people say, prison changed a man. I just never thought it would have the chance to change me. But then he arrived. First, all I heard was the heavy shuffle of boots and the clank of handcuffs. Guard muttered something. Keys jingled. And then a slow, steady voice answered. From the corridor, deep and calm, like an ocean that refused to stir even under storm winds. I didn't turn my head. I didn't want to know what kind of man they were putting in with me. But I felt him the moment he stepped inside. The air shifted as though the space itself adjusted around him. The smell of cigarette smoke clung faintly to him, mixed with something older like leather that had seen too many winters. The guard locked the door behind him. The footsteps faded. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he spoke. You're new. I turned my head. Then, finally, reluctantly, the man standing there wasn't what I'd expected. He wasn't young. His hair had more gray than black, and deep lines marked years of hardship around his eyes. Yet nothing about him looked weak. If anything, he carried himself with a quiet authority, the sort that didn't need fists to be felt. Yes, I forced out. He nodded. Once, then came further inside, placing his bundle of prison-issued bedding on the opposite bunk. But before he sat, he hesitated. You look frozen. The words were simple, but there was something in his voice, warmth trying to push through. A life that had probably taught him to keep it buried. I'm fine, I lied. You're shaking, he replied calmly. I wasn't. At least I didn't think I was. But when I looked down at my hands, they were trembling against the thin blanket. I hadn't even noticed. Without asking permission, he reached to the small radiator on the wall and gave it a sharp knock. It rattled, groaned, then coughed out a thin rush of warm air. There, he said. Better. He sat. Then, finally, on the opposite bunk, the springs creaked under his weight. For a while, he didn't look at me, didn't question me, didn't ask what I'd done. He just existed. And for some strange reason, that steadied something inside me. After a while, he spoke again. What's your name? I hesitated. In this place, names felt dangerous. Pieces of yourself, better kept hidden. But something about him, the quiet certainty in his tone, made lying feel unnecessary. Callum. He nodded again as if he'd already known. I'm Rowan. Rowan. The name suited him. Solid, earthy, unshakable. Silence settled between us. Again, but this time it wasn't cutting or tense. Felt almost companionable. The kind of silence that sits with you instead of pressing on your chest. I lay back staring at the ceiling and tried to breathe normally. It didn't work. Sleep didn't come. Hours passed. The prison dimmed into that strange nowhere time between night and morning, and somewhere in that thick, lonely quiet, Rowan shifted on his bunk. You're not sleeping, he said softly. I almost jumped. How do you know? You're breathing like a man waiting for something to go wrong. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My silence said enough. He stood then. I tensed, thinking he might cross the space between our bunks. But he didn't. He just leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely over his chest. People here can smell fear, he said. And you? Callum, you weak of it. I swallowed hard, a knot tightened in my stomach. I'm not scared. His brow lifted the slightest bit. Everyone is there first. Wait, it's not a weakness. It's human. Closed my eyes. What are you? Some kind of counselor? He huffed a soft laugh. The first one I'd heard from him was rough but warm. Hardly just someone who's been here long enough to know what the nights do to a man. His gaze softened then, almost imperceptibly. Whoever put you here must have known exactly what they were doing. I opened my eyes, startled. What do you mean? You don't belong here, he said simply. That's plain enough to see. The words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because no one in a long time had bothered to think anything about me yet. Before I could reply, footsteps echoed somewhere down the corridor, distant but sharp in the silence. Rowan's eyes flicked toward the door, his posture subtly shifting into something protective, though he tightened not a single muscle. Get in. Your bed? He murmured. What? Just do it, lad. I obeyed, sliding under the thin blanket. Seconds later, the footsteps paused outside our cell. Voice, another prisoner, slurring with anger or exhaustion, muttered something before limping away. Only when the sounds were gone did Rowan step back from the door. You see, he murmured, this place listens, so you listen back. I swallowed. Thanks. He didn't reply. Not then. He just returned to his bunk. But instead of lying down, he sat with his back resting against the wall, arms folded behind his head, looking straight up as if the concrete above held the stars he couldn't see. Minutes passed, maybe hours, and then quietly he said something that didn't match the hardness of his face or the steel of his voice. You don't have to be afraid when I'm here. Those words sank into me deeper than the cold ever had. I don't know why, but my eyes stung. Maybe because nobody had protected me before. Maybe because someone should have but never did. Maybe because I'd been running from one bad thing into another. And herein, the one place I should have felt safest, from no one, a stranger was offering safety. Convict, a man with a scar across his cheek, and age in his bones, but not a monster. Not to me. That night, Rowan didn't tell me his story, and I didn't ask. He didn't ask mine, and I was grateful. Some people talked to fill silence. Rowan talked only when truth was needed, and the truth he offered was simple. You're not alone anymore. You'd think prison would be the worst place in the world to find comfort, but lying there listening to his steady breathing from the opposite walk, the fear that had been clawing at my ribs began to loosen. Something else took its place, something quiet, tentative, almost tender. Trust. The next day was harder. Rowan walked with me through the corridor, keeping a step behind me as if shielding me without making it obvious. Men stared, some amused, some curious, some dangerous. But every time, eyes lingered on me too long. Rowan's presence shifted just enough to warn them away. No threats, no violence, just presence, just him. It showed me how to queue for meals without attracting attention, which guards were decent, which ones weren't, how to keep my head down without looking weak, and how to survive without losing the last piece of myself I was clinging to. But it was at night, always at night, when he changed, when the silence returned and the world narrowed to the space between our two bunks. Rowan spoke differently, softer, as if the dark stripped away every armor he'd worn during the day. He asked where I grew up, whether I'd ever been loved properly, whether I knew how strong I actually was. And I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone, not even myself. I didn't know why. Maybe because he listened without judgment. Maybe because he saw me clearer than I'd seen myself. Maybe because the world outside had taken everything from me, and somehow in the worst place imaginable, this man was giving some of it back. One night he sat on the edge of his bunk and said, almost hesitant, "You remind me of someone I once cared about." I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened in a way I didn't recognize. When he finally looked at me, there was something raw in his eyes, something human, vulnerable, and entirely unexpected. That night, our bunks felt too far apart, too distant, too cruel. We didn't cross the space between them. The guards patrolled too closely and Rowan respected boundaries even when others in this place wouldn't. But the want to close that distance hung in the air like a pulse. And when I fell asleep, it wasn't fear that filled my chest. It was him. His voice, his steadiness, his warmth, the man in the cell, the one the world had written off, had become the first good thing in my life in a very long time. I never could have imagined then how deeply he would stay with me, or how losing him even for a moment would feel like losing the only piece of myself still worth saving. Freedom did not feel like sunlight on my skin. Felt like stepping out into an empty world. One too loud, too bright, too cruelly indifferent to everything I had survived. When the gates opened, I expected something dramatic. The rush of relief, the taste of hope, the sound of life calling me back. But instead there was only a hollow numbness, the feeling like I'd left a piece of myself behind in that concrete cage, a piece that looked a lot like Rowan. I walked out with a paper bag of belongings, a bus ticket I had no money to top up, and a warning from a guard to stay out of trouble this time, lad. As if trouble was something I'd ever asked for. The sky above Yorkshire was gray, stretching endlessly like a faded blanket. The wind cut across my face, familiar and indifferent. For the first time in months, I could walk any direction I wanted, and I realized I had nowhere to go. Nowhere except back to the only man who had shown me kindness before everything collapsed. My first employer, the one who had lied, destroyed my name, and thrown me to wolves out of jealousy and spite. But he had also been the last person to offer me shelter, and I had no other door to knock on. The world doesn't give second chances to people like me. It barely gives first ones. Found myself on the same street, my breath catching as the familiar neon sign of the shop flickered in the drizzle. The window was smeared with condensation, the inside busy with customers grabbing their usual lunch orders. Everything looked the same, painfully, maddeningly the same, as if my life hadn't been shattered in the meantime. I stood outside the window for nearly a minute before I forced myself. The bell chimed, heads turned, conversations dipped, then returned. But the owner, the man who had once smiled at me too warmly, touched my shoulder, too deliberately, whispered promises with strings attached, froze when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped out from behind the counter, a forced concern coating his voice. "Callum, I thought you were in prison." I finished flatly. I was. His face twitched, not with guilt, with fear that his secret might come spilling out. "I didn't think you'd come back," he whispered. "I didn't think I'd have to." He swallowed, eyes darting to the customers behind me. "Come, step outside." For a moment, we moved behind the shop, where the rain tapped against the rusted metal bins. He crossed his arms, pretending to be composed, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Callum," he began. "What happened?" "Got out of hand." I was angry, hurt. "I made a mistake." "Okay. You can't imagine how much I regretted it." "No," I said quietly. "You regretted getting caught." That shut him up. The truth hung between us like smoke. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I can make it up to you. Come back to work. I'll increase your pay. You can stay in the spare room again until you're stable." The offer should have tempted me. I was exhausted, homeless, hungry, and broken in ways I didn't even understand yet. But nothing in his words reminded me of kindness. Not the genuine kind, the kind Rowan had offered. It wasn't love he felt. Wasn't even affection. Was possession. He wanted me back because it made him feel powerful. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not coming back." His mask cracked. "You ungrateful little." "Don't," I warned, my voice controlled but trembling. "Don't pretend you ever cared about me." For a moment, his face twisted with something ugly. Then he stepped back. "Fine," he spat. "Go starve. No one else is stupid enough to take in a boy with a record." He stormed inside. The door slammed. The rain fell harder. And for the first time since stepping out of prison, I truly felt the weight of freedom. It didn't feel like hope. It felt like standing on the wrong side of a cliff edge with no way across. But there was someone who once crossed a different kind of abyss to reach me. Someone whose voice still echoed in my mind. You're not alone anymore, Rowan. Didn't know where he was now. I didn't even know if he was still inside. He'd said little about his sentence, only that he'd been there long enough to understand the walls, enough to understand me, but he had protected me when I had nothing. Listened when I was falling apart, studied me without ever forcing anything from me, seen me without judgment. That kind of connection didn't fade, not even across prison bars. And suddenly I realized where my feet were taking me. Yorkshire. Prison stood gray against the horizon, massive and immovable, the kind of place you never forget even when you try. Standing outside the visitor's reception, I felt a cold panic rise through me. What if he didn't want to see me? What if he'd already moved on? Detached himself the moment we'd been separated. What if I'd been nothing to him? But I filled the form anyway. Name, date of birth, prisoner I wish to see. And when I wrote Rowan Hart, my hands shook so badly the letters looked like they'd been dragged across the page by a trembling ghost. The officer took my slip without expression. You're lucky, he muttered. He's allowed visitors today. I don't remember sitting. I don't even remember breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs as if trying to break free. Then I heard my name. Callum. I stood so fast the plastic chair screeched across the floor. There. He was older than I remembered, not in years but in weight, carried his hair slightly longer, his beard trimmed neatly, his eyes shadowed with the same quiet depth that had once calmed something wild inside me. But when he saw me, something broke. His face softened, not with surprise, not with pity, but with something deeply, achingly human. Lad, he murmured, stepping forward as far as the table. Aloud. You're out. I nodded, swallowing hard. Rowan, I didn't know where else to go. His eyes flicked over me, my worn clothes, my thin frame, the rain dripping off my sleeves, his jaw clenched, protective instinct flaring. Immediately, like an old reflex waking. Did someone hurt you? He asked. No, I whispered. Not today. He exhaled. Slowly, relief easing the tension from his shoulders. We sat for a while. Neither of us spoke. We just looked. The way two people look when the world has taken everything from them except the memory of kindness. Finally, Rowan leaned forward, elbows on the table. Callum, he said softly. Why are you here? I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. My voice came out cracked. Because you're the only person who ever treated me like I mattered. His expression wavered just slightly as though the words hit him somewhere he trained himself not to feel. You always mattered, he murmured. Long before you believed it. I hadn't meant to say anything more. I hadn't meant to confess anything. Not here, not now. Not with guards watching through glass. But the truth was too heavy to keep inside. Miss you, I said. Rowan inhaled. Sharply, not with shock, with something like grief mixed with hope. A hope he'd never allowed himself to voice. It reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. He couldn't. Not with cameras watching, but the closeness alone set my chest alight. Think about you more than I should, he said quietly. More than is sensible. More than is safe. My eyes stung. Don't care about safe, Callum. His voice broke for the first time. You're young. You've still got a life ahead of you. You don't need a man like me dragging you back toward places you fought so hard to escape. I'm not running anymore, I whispered. Not from the past, not from myself, not from you. For the first time his mask cracked fully. But before he could reply, a guard tapped the blast. A warning. 2 minutes left. Rowan swallowed, leaning closer. When I get out, he said, I'll come find you. Rowan. No, he insisted gently. Listen to me. I'll find you. Then you still feel the same. His eyes softened with a tenderness that nearly undid me. We'll start something real. Something we can build, not hide. Nodded, breath shaking. I'll wait. It held my gaze, steady, unbroken, anchored, in a way that made the world outside blur into nothing. You don't wait for men who don't deserve you, he murmured. But if you choose to wait for me, I'll spend the rest of my days proving you made the right choice. The guards signaled the end of our visit. He stood. I stood. For a moment we simply looked at each other through the barrier of rules and uniforms and time. Then Rowan whispered, "You're not alone anymore, Callum. Not now. Not ever." And as I walked out into the cold Yorkshire wind, the world didn't feel empty anymore. Felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. For more heart-touching stories, comment below. Who do you think showed true love and care?